All right. We are live on Facebook. Hello, everybody. We are waiting on a couple of friends to join us, but we are going to jump in because it's the lunch hour. You want to start. So while we're waiting on our other host to hop on, we're going to jump in. Let me introduce myself. I am Nick Smith, a Democrat. I work in government, work in public policy, and I'm happy to convene this panel. Let's go to Nayela.
Hi, everybody. I am Nayela Amaru, and I have weaved the last 20 years between nonprofit, electoral organizing, and government. I'm excited for this conversation, especially since I have some lived experience as a Democrat from the battlegrounds of Texas and Georgia. So I have some thoughts on what that could potentially mean for us as a party in future cycles.
Yep. And we have two others who have joined us. And I'm encouraging folks who are watching just to jump on. And we want to hear from all of you about your thoughts about the national scope, New York State scope, or wherever you live. And of course, if you're in New York City, what's happening in some of the local races. There's some tough stuff happening locally as well. So why don't we go to Mike Toomey and then Jacob Gold.
Hello, everybody. Also, Michael, as Nick said, Michael Toomey, also work in government, attorney, bouncing around in different legal matters, political matters, and just excited for this opportunity. Glad to talk to everybody.
Jake.
Hi, Jacob Gold here. Also a government guy, government employee as well, and have worked on many campaigns as well, primarily obviously on the local level. But here we are.
Yes. And so thank you guys for that. We're waiting on Chet Whye and Nekpen Osuan Wilson. They're going to be on there just in a minute. So, but we're going to start because we don't want to take too much time. I went to bed last night, as I'm sure many of you did who are watching, and then those of you on the panel, kind of like anxious and nervous. I watched the polls. I have some agita and anxiety from 4 years ago, where we nominated a candidate in Hillary Clinton. Actually, Nayela was one of the literal nominators of Hillary, which is very cool. But and she came just so close, and we saw it the last week of the election. Jim Comey jumped in and I think caused her to lose the election, and that's my opinion. But I think that's probably borne out by facts. What we did see in terms of polling was that she was just far ahead. And while there's some issues with polling all around, I do feel like, but for Comey, she probably would have won. So there's some theories among Democrats that, the polls were wrong 4 years ago, and it miscalculated, her support. I don't think that's true. I think the national scope pretty much bared out the polls. What we're seeing now in this election, in my opinion, is we're seeing kind of an undercount in Trump's support this year. I think that's for many reasons, but principally, no one's talking about the fact that Donald Trump is the incumbent president, number one. Number two, Donald Trump is very good at the emotional pitch, the psychological touch to voters. And I think Democrats sometimes take a more academic approach to campaigning, whereas Trump, and I'm not saying this is the right thing to do, but just a matter of why I think he's doing so well, even in the midst of COVID. He knows how to really appeal to people's sense of personal identity and, us versus them mentality, and it's a potent force in politics. So I think no matter what happens, the Democratic Party, even if we win the election, the fact that Trump was so close does speak to what the Democrats have to figure out how to do, which is really speak to Americans who are not in what some consider, the East Coast, West Coast sort of coastal divide, and really speak strongly and deliver for heartland folks. And I'll just mention one other thing, and I'll open the floor to Nayela, then whoever else is on. Good to see you, Sophia. Thanks for calling in. We also saw the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice. That seat belonged to Merrick Garland, and of course, the U.S. Senate under Mitch McConnell refused to consider that nomination. Well, the water spilled. I think that also plays a part in why I think Democrats are turning out more. I think Biden's going to get the most popular votes of any Democratic candidate in history, including his former boss, President Obama. But I think that in the midst of COVID, there was no reason why we're not turning out a much greater numbers. I've been watching the returns all night and all morning. I've slept a couple of hours, and I think we're down to just a couple of states Pennsylvania and Arizona. And I may not have all my states ready, so you all can jump in. But I think what my prediction is very clear. While I thought before that Joe Biden would get in the 310, 312 electoral vote range, I now see him getting between 270 and 278, 79, 280. That's my current prediction. But so those are my initial thoughts. I'm going to stop talking. I really want to hear what other folks think about where we are, and if you have ideas about the issues, if you live, wherever you live, if you're seeing, if you have your observations, feel free to let us know. Jamie, thank you for jumping in. We'll come to you all after we start with Nyala, one of our co-hosts. Nyala.
Hi, yeah, so you just said a whole lot. And it was good stuff because all of it needs to be considered, not just for today, but for future election cycles across all levels that we're running for. A few things. One, I think that I have never trusted polls, right? Just as a citizen, also as an electoral, campaign worker, political operative. I don't trust polls for a variety of reasons aside from errors in polling sampling. But you would be, it's hard to poll racism, right? Because we're talking about, how people are going to answer questions honestly when there's such a negative perception of one of the candidates that is running for office. And so for me, I always have looked at polling with a grain of salt, knowing that there are so many different opportunities for sampling, and this election cycle is certainly no different, right? And I think that we can kind of see that. Of all the swing states, Biden was 11 plus points above in Wisconsin, and we barely, are squeaking out a win there, right? And so I think that it just goes to show that regardless of what polls may say, always take it with a grain of salt. It is never, anything set in stone is not known until after all the votes are counted. The second point that you brought up that I think is important, I think to kind of unpack, not just through like a partisan lens, but I think just as a nation, right, is why this is not a blowout, right? When there's this perception that, that we could possibly, at least, while we may not know the outcomes for sure, at least we would hopefully have the electoral college votes above 300, right? To almost, say there's a mandate against, what this man has offered in terms of his presidency after the last couple of years. But the election has shown that voters will vote in their interests, right? Which goes back to what is the conversation the Democratic Party needs to have in terms of not just the type of candidates that we run, but the types of messages that we're offering, right? And I think that we've had this conversation for years, as long as I've been in the business, in terms of acknowledging that Democrats are typically poor on messaging, that we tend to be more academic, right? And so whether, whichever side of the argument that you fall on that, I think it remains, I think it's clear that when we have such a consensus within the party that one man is so bad for the country, but clearly the other half of the country thinks otherwise, that we need to kind of reevaluate our perception of one, who we are as a country, two, what voters are interested in being catered to in terms of legislative platforms and policy solutions. And two, also, I think, really understand that our political system, Republicans, Democrats, third parties, are all working within larger structural systems, right? That no politician is going to be the answer to, right? So even if, Biden were to win, by a landslide or by a little bit, there is a long overdue conversation and action in terms of how do we move towards healing by way of policy solutions, by way of partisan politics. Is that even possible when both parties are navigating within these systems of oppression, all the isms and all the obias? So that's kind of my top line muddled thoughts of trying to process what I've seen of last night and today's returns.
Yeah, I think those are really fantastic points. I'm going to actually, again, pause and not do all the talking. I do want to open the floor to our colleagues. Our co-host Chet Whye is joining now, so when he gets on, we'll give the floor to him as well. But Sophia, Jake, Jamie, Mike, any initial thoughts on what you're seeing at the national level, et cetera? Anyone can just jump in.
I definitely like what Nyla said regarding the polling, that you can't poll racism. I'd even go one further. You can't poll voter suppression. Right now, we're sitting, I think actually as we speak, there's two cases, one in Pennsylvania where there's a lawsuit to try and stop the curing of several ballots in, I think, a southeastern county in Pennsylvania around Philadelphia. And also a federal judge is hearing on the post office and 300,000 ballots just not getting delivered. As the way I understand it, these aren't just not getting delivered, but not getting delivered in key areas: Atlanta, Philadelphia, Central Pennsylvania, Michigan, places where not only the ballots not getting delivered, their systems are set up where the ballots have to be received, not postmarked, received to be counted by a certain date. So yes, like the numbers are all out of whack, and we're going to spend months on the autopsy on this election, however it plays out. But I had this problem 4 years ago where you saw also in Wisconsin, massive drop off in Milwaukee and voter turnout for Hillary because of voter ID laws. We're going to have to really account for this. It's not just because there's a drop off in turnout or the numbers are all skewed. It's not necessarily a reflection of personal preference automatically. We like it to be, but there could be nefarious work in place.
Yeah, all great points. Anyone else going to jump in? And then once we have some initial comments, I'm going to share my screen and pull up the map just to go through some of the states, just to really show folks where we are. So anyone else can jump in.
Right. So I want to ask a couple questions about, what's the date that it has to be received by to count?
Oh, so that depends on the state. And Jamie, you may actually know more of this, but or Mike or anyone. That depends on the state. So I know, for example, in Pennsylvania, they are, if I understand correctly, they're going to be counting absentee ballots up until Friday. But it's a state by state sort of issue. Is that right, guys?
That's right. It all depends on the state constitution, the state laws. They have different number of days they're able to count up to. The Supreme Court has deferred, and federal courts are deferring to the state rules. But there might be some challenges based on how long can they take to count the votes. But but we should know Wisconsin today and Michigan and Pennsylvania, potentially by midday tomorrow. Yeah. And that might be all we need to know. Right. I expect Joe Biden could declare victory by tomorrow night. Yeah.
Very good. Let me, before we go to your second question, Jake, let me introduce one of our co-hosts, Chet Whye, who did he was with us last night until 2 a.m.
Man.
Yeah.
No,
welcome back, sir.
Hey, man.
Yeah. So before we go to Jake's second question, Chet, any initial thoughts about what you've seen this morning since you woken up and looked at some of the returns?
No, just what pretty much what Jake said, and pretty much what we were saying last night. I think we'll know by Friday morning, of course. We'll probably know as soon as tomorrow. It will be a Biden win. Yeah. And what happens after that, we need to all be prepared for.
That's right.
In many ways.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Chet. And Jake, you had a second question?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
So now when we watch right now on TV, on whatever channel is reporting, it says the percentage, 92%, 80% counted, right? Is that in-person totals? Is that everything? I mean, if we're still collecting mail-in ballots, how are they supposed to know how many are going to come in and what actual percentage they're reporting right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe those are in-person votes, and then they're, depending on the different rules, count the absentee ballots afterward. Is that folks' understanding, or is that incorrect?
I think that's the percentage of ballots received. I believe via in-person early vote or ballots received. That number can go up, but that's my understanding. It's funny because like in New York, I was looking at the results last night and it was saying percentage of scanners received, which seemed to mean only the in-person vote, not the percentage of the total vote. So I think it also depends on what you're looking at.
Right. So I stand correct. That's right. It's received, not just in person. It's received ballots, and then some states
By
can count.
now, right? Because
the
in any
absentees.
election, absentee ballots come in.
Oh, Jake, I think you video froze. So we'll come back to you afterward. But Jamie, you were gonna jump in. Feel free.
Here's what I want to ask. Everyone's talking national. We're all following that, of course, but there's a much bigger storyline for a lot of the people on this call and what's happening in New York State. You're seeing a potential net loss in the state Senate of 5 seats, a potential net loss in the Assembly of 11 seats, terrible, potentially crushing defeats across Long Island and upstate and Westchester and Hudson Valley. And, my team and I are trying to figure out, what is it? Is it taxes? Is it bail reform? Is it just Trump's coattails? What is it? But it's certainly going to impact state and local politics here. And I'm curious what folks, what they think that is a result of and what the impact is going to be.
That's an amazing question. Anybody want to jump in on that? I have a couple of thoughts myself, but I'll wait for other folks to jump in if you have thoughts.
My preliminary thoughts are, I was not surprised when I saw the numbers. I'm always forever hopeful, but I unfortunately was not surprised. I think one, it was a combination of a few things, but primarily one, turnout, right? This is a presidential year, and the Republican voter base was mobilized and they turned out. The second part, I think, is also just communication of policy, right? Republicans are incredibly adept at being able to connect policy solutions to that emotional connection that really mobilize and engage voters that Democrats, quite frankly, have not really, I think, learned how to finesse the necessity of being able to do that, right? We can talk about policy solutions and how they're centered on X, Y, Z, and it sounds beautiful in a talking point, and it looks great in a graphic design, looks fantastic on a town hall flyer. But if it does not emotionally connect to the voters, then you have not done what you have needed to do as a political party, which is to not just outreach to voters, but to engage. Because once you engage voters, you have engaged them hopefully for more than just one election cycle. And I think that's sometimes something I've seen consistently across the different states that I've worked within Democratic politics, is that we get comfortable, right? And we take that first time voter, or we take that, the wins that we've had, and then we pat ourselves on the back and we congratulate ourselves and say, yes, we flipped the seat. Yes, we retained the seat. And then we forget to engage, right? I think that organizing is should be central to what we do as political parties. But too often than not, what we do is we come around election time, and we do very superficial outreach to communities, specifically communities of color, whereas Republicans have been engaging and mobilizing and tapping into that emotional connection all 4 years, right? Or throughout the 2 years. And so I think for me, what I have seen, this is not just in New York, but again, like in other states that I've worked within, is that we lose, or we have not mastered that ability to really connect with the voters and to continue to engage with them once election day has come and gone, and in between the cycles where you really need to build, my bobby pin is falling out, our emotional connection, because once you build that emotional connection with a voter, you have them more often than not for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. I think you're totally right. I mean, my kind of prevailing theory here is Trump is a master psychologist. He plays to the base wants and fears of probably a wider swath of the electorate than we'd like to think. And, especially when times are tough like these, people really focus on me issues, not I want to help other people, but what do I need right now? And law and order, taxes, stock market, like those are the things that I think resonated with Long Island, Hudson Valley, upstate New York, and those suburban and rural voters. So it's sad, it's unfortunate, but and it'll be interesting to see what I'm starting to think about is what is the impact on progressive politics in New York State and New York City moving forward. So thank you for sharing that. And I got to run, guys, but thanks for organizing this. It's good to see everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for calling in. And we'll do more of these. So feel free to join again.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Chet.
No problem.
Hey.
So I don't want to call people out. We do have some more folks that called in, but they may not want to be named. So if there are anyone that called in that want to participate, you feel free to unmute now. And if you have questions, feel free.
Yeah, we get mired in this thing as Democrats. I call it the paralysis of analysis. You know, we want to project things. We want to pull out an iPad and look at our diagnosis that way and apply it. And what we wound up doing, we wound up really missing our own electorate. We wound up being hypocrites as far as what we're supposed to represent. We're supposed to represent, you know, we tout ourselves as representing people and having people in the forefront, and really it's how people vote.
Yeah.
You know, because as soon as the election is over, we shut down the engagement. And that's not lost on the people that we're trying to keep with us. So there's some autopsy we need to do on this election. No matter how it turns out, we need to do some major readjustment up and down across the board, really.
Yeah, agreed. So we do have a question. Okay, I'll ask it. Someone asked, oh, Jamie's off now, but it's for Jamie. One of us can take it. Jamie said we are seeing crushing defeats across the state. So he mentioned Long Island and that loss of, I think he said 5 state Senate seats in the Democratic Party. Does he foresee, or do we foresee that changing when all the mail-in votes are counted? That's a good question. Anyone have any thoughts on, you know, the state Senate and Assembly seats and those losses based on the outstanding mail-in votes? Okay.
That's a great possibility.
Yeah.
We need to bank on that.
I would think so too. Because
also,
go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, being like I'm in South Brooklyn, so the Gennardis race is very present in my neighborhood, and where we're conscious of that, and the fact that there is a substantial amount of paper still out there, and I think I believe it was something like 8,000 Democratic ballots were returned. So because the fact that, as I understand it, no mail-in ballots have been. I assume the mail-in ballots that were dropped off at a poll site were counted, but the mail-ins when they were mailed in have not been even looked at, and I don't think they'll be looked at till Monday. So it's hard for me to, at the risk of delving back into that paralysis of analysis framework, which is very true. It's very hard for me to even make any extrapolation when I don't have all the data. So it's like once I know exactly what the situation is there going to be comeback? Is there, how much of this is also responsible? We were on the receiving end of that Safer Together money bomb that went off around the city and around the state, really, for targeting 6 or 8 vulnerable Democrats for re-election. So that's got to be factored in too. We need to look into all of it as well.
Agreed. Let's also welcome our other co-host, Nekpen. Thank you for jumping on, and you have the floor to make any remarks you want about what you're saying, et cetera.
Hi, Nick. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Apologies for being late. Multiple calls today. I am just sort of disappointed. I've been working with League 46 and some of our young progressives, networks over the last 8 months, and I know we did our part, right? If you look at the numbers and exit polling and count what's been counted, people who are younger did their part. Unfortunately, older voters, though, they say Biden has gained more traction than Hillary. I don't count 2016. I'm focused on 2020. Let me be honest. I think people need to realize that the amount of sexism in this country is not at all going to be wiped away by any comparison to now. So I'm not even looking at 2016. For 2020, though, after 4 years of Trump, you would expect different in my mind. And I'm pretty sure all of you have probably touched on this a little bit. I think the amount of very clear racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia was not enough to turn off people. So I learned more about my country in this cycle than any candidate I've been working for or any of the local politics that I know. So it's been really sad to see some of these numbers. I didn't think it would be so close, but I do. The states that we're talking about now, like the Wisconsin, Nevada, some of these new battleground states that we're in are sort of exciting from an analytics perspective. My background is in analytics. I work at Deloitte consulting on this very topic for Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies. The numbers in these new battlegrounds are so exciting for the party. I'm really sad for our country, but I think that we have learned a lot in this cycle, both about our country and where we need to go forward as a party. So I'll start with that.
Yeah, that's great.
Very quickly,
go ahead,
I want to build on a point that Nekpen brought up in terms of the new battleground states. So I think it's really important that we recognize that these battleground states are battleground states because they have been Black and Brown led organizers, have been putting in the work and have been organizing across those states for years. The Democratic Party did not even give these states a second look, probably until they saw the numbers beginning to flip. And I think it's important that we recognize that. As someone who is from Georgia, has lived in Texas and Alabama, as a Democrat, I've always known that we have had the numbers, but we have never been invested in a national way for us to be organized or mobilized and engaged, right? That is on the party. And I think it's important that we recognize and hold the Democratic Party, because instead of investing in the outreach and engagement of Black, Latino, and Asian voters and new folks coming in, they're out there chasing the votes of the white working class, right? So let's acknowledge that and hold that recognition of where we fall short as a party.
That's real.
The other part I want to recognize is that, again, to create and hold space for the impact of organizing, right? And so I think that even if this is not a blowout, and if for some unlikely reason Trump should pull this off, I think it's really important that we recognize that this is a long-term game, and politics is not the solution, that it's going to bring us closer towards liberation, equity, and justice, right? It is a tool to be used, but it is not the end game, right? And I think it's just really important for me that people understand this system in a holistic way, in that the work is being done. It's not being done by certain folks that have financial political capital. It's being done by folks on the ground who have come from marginalized and most directly impacted communities that have been doing the work that has been changing the electoral landscape in these battleground states. So I just wanted to create space and hold space to recognize the work of Black, Indigenous, and Brown workers who've been doing the work on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to totally agree with you. I think one of the things that I want to have this conversation here with you all, because I know folks here are big D Dems at the end of the day. We can argue with the party as much as we want, but we know where we're welcome and we know where we're not welcome. We're not going to go where we're not welcome because we're not happy with where we are, right? Like, we're not going to do that. So for the party, what have we learned in this cycle? I totally agree with you, Naila. I think one of the things I'm a little concerned about in the rhetoric of it is just this idea that there is not a space for white America to be held accountable for its own performance, that the work continuously has to be in our community. I think we need to do more work with white America that says that they are morally right, that they are morally sound, and they still vote for a person like Donald Trump. Can we have that conversation about why it is 2016 was a double down on 2016 for many of these people? Let's be honest. The folks who call themselves Christian, who really at the end of the day maybe are struggling in this country just like Black and Brown people, but will rather vote for a Trump candidate. Let's talk about who is going to hold those people accountable, because we can organize all day and we do need to get more of us registered, right? Don't count me wrong. We registered 700,000 new voters in Arizona in order to flip Arizona. That's a lot of effort, right? We organized more Black and Brown communities with League 46 than ever in the history of the Democratic Party. So with that work to get where we are today, to have such a razor thin win, in my mind, is unacceptable for white America. They should be just as concerned about this race as we are as Black and Brown people asking the party to double down, because this is ridiculous. We're in a country that is supposed to, for the people, by the people, who are supposed to uphold law and order for everyone. And this is the type of voter turnout we're seeing. I'm so pissed. Like, this is ridiculous. This is what white America wants.
White America's interest is to always protect its own power. That's the only thing I wanted to add. Yes, it co-signed to everything you
anybody
said.
Anybody with power protects their power. Anybody with power. Yeah, I mean, look at Lil Wayne.
I know.
He's got money. He's protecting his money.
Dude, who
all
are
right.
you?
All right. So we need to acknowledge and look at all of these dynamics for what they are. Folks are not going to give away their power. And when I looked at that, I looked at that, in a white context, but look at it in a black context. And Lil Wayne is an example of that. But one of the things I wanted to get to about organizing, whoever just came on, you got a lot of background noise.
That was my fault. I unmuted him, so I'll bring it back in 1 second.
Okay. All right. So one of the things I think we miss as far as organizing is what is our get as far as organizing, and we misplace the thing that's going to help us when our organizing is centered solely around votes, and it's not centered around organizing engagement, organizing the harvesting of ideas and issues, and organizing people to participate in that on the local level, on the street level, on the block level. We're not doing any of that. And Republicans are very good at communicating to folks on the street level, this is in your interest. You might not like, our vessel that we're using to get this done, but you're going to wind up with judges all over the place.
Yeah.
And the things that are important to you as far as the kind of society that you want, it doesn't matter what they do. All right. Because they're going to have to come through us in order to get it done. And that's where we're going to stop.
That's what they like.
And they will look the other way to get that. And we have not looked at this thing from the standpoint of what we're doing wrong. Yeah. We always, this conversation, it has got to stop being dismissive of the people who don't vote and the people who don't turn out our way, because that's not saying anything about them more than it's saying something about us and how we do these things. And we rinse and repeat. And then we want to sit and we want to criticize. And, after elections, we want to talk about the popular vote and all this other foolishness, instead of what we did wrong.
Mm-hmm. Preach. So let's save a couple of minutes for anyone who hasn't been able to contribute yet. You have the floor now. So go ahead.
Hi. So first, I'd like to thank Nick for inviting me onto this. My name is Mufazzal Hussain. I'm the newly elected Democratic District Leader in Assembly District 38.
Congratulations
and,
again.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. So, our country is divided. We already knew that since 2016. But now when we look at it, we also realize that we failed to unite the nation. When we look at the polls, we see that Joe Biden is barely winning. And that just shows that the Republicans are willing to accept the KKK. They are willing to accept their blatant racism. If we look in South Brooklyn, where Andrew Gennardis is behind, if we look at Max Rose's race, if we look at in Nassau County and Congressmember I forgot his last name, Thomas something, I forgot his last name, but he's also behind, polling behind. This just shows that the Republicans are ready, or the white conservatives are ready to accept KKK into the mainstream and go back to the 60s. And that is saddening. Now, when we say that we're Democrats and we should have been uniting, we have not united our people. We did not accept the Zoomers or Gen Z or the millennials into the party. We did not embrace the progressive policies the way the Republicans embrace their conservative policies. Had we done that, we could have united our people. And it's truly a shame that at this point of our nation, we are just stuck in this situation. With the RBG gone, if Trump does end up winning, we lose our rights and we just go back to the 1960s. And so my message to everyone who's watching is to accept the younger folks and the progressive values and not holding on to power for decades and stop being career politicians. And that's the only way we can truly get our country back from this orange fascist that we have in the White House.
Yeah. I, again, agree with you 100%. So let's pause just for 1 minute because we got about 20 minutes left. We'll try to hop at 1:30 and then depending on what happens, we'll come back after the work hour ends. But let me share my screen just for a minute, and I'm going to go to the map just to give a quick recap as to where it looks like we are. As we're going through the map, if anyone has any comments about, what you think is happening, for example, in Michigan or Wisconsin, Arizona, et cetera, jump in. So give me a second to share that, and then we can have that conversation. So give me 1 second. Okay, cool. Can you guys see that map? I know it's out of the screen there. Is that visible?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we see it.
Actually, I'm on the wrong page. I should be on the APT one. Yeah, this one I can go through the vote totals. Okay, so we are pretty clear that Florida's gone. It's called for Trump, 96% and 51-48. Close election, about 400, a little less than 400,000 down. I think we heard a lot about how, the issue of socialism was potent for many Cubans living in a part of that state, et cetera. And the theory that the Latino vote is not a monolith, and it's important for the Democratic Party to, one, realize that, and two, figure out how to respond to that message. But, Florida,
Nick,
always, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you just said. I worked Florida for a year and a half under President Obama. I was a data director there, every single county.
Yeah.
Every single board of election there, which is another good thing to highlight, because the BOE really has a strong hold in most of the counties in Florida. One of the things I thought was interesting is the swell in turnout, because remember in 2008, 2012, and 2016, we were betting on turnout to save us in Florida. But in Florida this cycle, both Republicans and Democrats turned out in strong numbers, and Trump won. So I think what's really interesting is that the changing political landscape of Florida no longer, in my mind, makes it a state that we need to double down on. I'm so sorry to say that. I know somebody's going to kill me because I keep getting messages about Florida and North Carolina. I do not think we need to keep going there. We need to find these new states, as we talked about, new battlegrounds. One, because of the changing demographics, as you talked about, right? The Latino vote is not a monolith. The Democrats are not promised to win under Latino support. And in Florida, for sure, it's very conservative in their ideology. I know a lot of people talk about us accepting more progressive views. Places like Florida are definitely not going to vote for us if we go any further left. I mean, and I'm not saying we shouldn't go further left, but North Carolinians and Floridians do not want anything left by a step. And so for our party, if we want to progressively move policies forward, that's fine. But we can't keep going to those states as a result of taking that position. I just wanted to call that out, in my opinion.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's go back to the map. And as I said earlier, if anyone has comments, just jump in. This is a conversation. Okay, so we're back on the map. So let's look at the states that are uncalled. Let's see where we are in Pennsylvania, 80% reporting, 53-45. So it looks like Donald Trump, as of right now, 80% in at 3,061,000. And Biden is at 2,595,000. So that's about what, about 500K, give or take, some votes. Any thoughts on Pennsylvania? This could be the state that we come down to. I'm hearing that, and Arizona. Any thoughts on Pennsylvania and or Arizona? And just for context, Arizona, 86% in, Biden 51%, Trump 48%. And I'm hearing that the governor of Arizona has been calling the Trump campaign in the last hour, basically saying that he sees, Governor Ducey in Arizona, he sees some pockets of votes that are positive for Trump. But some of the commentators were saying, yeah, that's true, but they don't see Arizona going Trump's way. So any comments?
Yeah, no, it's not enough of a margin in Arizona, I think, for them to keep fighting that. I think PA, I want to just start. PA is where I'm watching closely, because it's on a win route. Yep. If we had won PA, we would have been okay. But I think this is not positive. But obviously, I want to say two things. One, it's interesting that PA is the areas that are voting for Trump are something like 70% white when I did the analysis this morning. So this idea of like how even white male voters who didn't vote for Hillary but voted for Obama are not voting for Biden, which is very, very scary. So I think, again, maybe it is some of this rhetoric around conservative ideology, leftist policy. I thought it would be very different in PA looking at today. So it's been very looking at the precinct level data.
Yeah. Any other notes or thoughts on Pennsylvania, Arizona, or any other state? You can talk about whatever state they want.
The one thing that I think I'll just flag related to Arizona and also Texas, although we ultimately ended up losing Texas this round, is I think for me, it reflects the growing political power of the Latino vote, which has really been overlooked by the party. And again, I want to reiterate that the organizing that has been done on the ground has been by community-based organizations and not the Democratic Party. I do hope in future cycles that the Democratic Party looks at these numbers and recognizes the potential. And so if you are willing to invest in other communities outside of, again, like the white working class, and I just want to clarify that there are Black and brown working class as well, but the media oftentimes perpetuates the white working class narrative. I think it'll be interesting to see in future cycles how that gap works in our favor, if that recognition of the growing electoral power of the Latino vote, with the recognition that they are a very diverse community, right? And so, your Latinos in Florida, are a little bit different from your folks maybe in California or Texas. And, you have to be cognizant of those cultural nuances to be effective in the electoral organizing if you are doing it in service of the party. So that's just something I'm looking at for future cycles.
As far as Pennsylvania, I'm still shocked that there's almost 30%. I think I just checked the numbers now. 30% of the vote is still out in Allegheny County, and that's Pittsburgh. And I believe, Biden is still leading. So that's still very encouraging to me. And then on top of that, going also back to the larger points about other states and things like Nekpen and Nyla were talking about expanding new battleground states, new fights. Jamie Harrison, unfortunately, couldn't pull it off in South Carolina, but came closer than I think anybody in traditional rational mindset could have imagined against somebody like Lindsey Graham. But one thing that I took away from that is also bear in mind that Jamie Harrison was a chair of the state Democratic Party. So I would be astonished if the energy and the resources that went into that campaign does not translate into a lot of infrastructure building in South Carolina for the years going ahead. So
you would think so, right, Michael? You would think we would stay around and say, hey, all these people gave us money for Jamie, let's do something here.
Take it and just build with it, and what seeds that could grow into over the next few years. I'd like to keep an eye on it going forward. I feel like I might be wildly optimistic going by Nekpen's face, but I've been fatalistic for 4 years. This is my one optimism day. Let me have it.
I think also another point I'll quickly make is what's interesting to me with these swing states is the amount of money that the Democratic Party and folks, throughout these campaigns. I'm thinking of the need to be strategic, right? And intentional about where we choose to invest our money and how we use the funds. Organizing takes money. So absolutely, we need to allocate resources to do the on the ground organizing, now and over the next 4 years and forever and always. But I also think it's important that we rethink our strategy of just throwing money at a campaign. Case in point, I'm thinking of Mitch McConnell and Amy McGrath, right? We knew that was an uphill battle. We knew this, right? And yet millions and millions and millions of dollars that could have been distributed in more effective strategic ways that would have had a greater impact. But instead, we tend to just throw money at a campaign based off of the PR blitz and not through a critical analysis of thinking, how is this going to advance the electoral wins as the Democratic Party? So that's another thing. Again, it's just you can raise money and still really lose battles.
Nyla, I have a question for you on that topic. When you think about the for races that are in the Congress in general, I'll say Congress, both parts of the House, I think that we think about how that's important to complement the White House, right? We have to spend big in these places so that we can control for 4 years in the legislature. So I hear your criticism. I want to ask, do you think it's about not wanting to win an election, or what happens before and after elections that you're most concerned about for the way spending is going right now?
It's about investing where we don't have an infrastructure already in place, right? As a party, we should be building and strengthening infrastructures across all 50 states. What we can't
Yes.
expect to win is not have infrastructure or have really tedious funding looking infrastructure and throw millions and millions of dollars and, hoping for a win. As it is right now, it's very unlikely that we're going to have the Senate flip, right? Of course, keeping my fingers crossed. I hope that my candidate Warnock in Georgia wins, but even if he does, it's not looking good for Sarah Gideon in Maine, right? And so we still don't have the votes in the Senate that we need. And I think that sometimes what Democrats lose sight of is looking at the big wins and not investing the organizing capacity and the financial investments in building the smaller wins that lead to a strengthened infrastructure, which leads to wins that will be more consistent and not just an anomaly, such as like a Max Rose or a Doug Jones, right? Like build the infrastructure and we will have the systems in place that we need to be more consistent in winning these legislative seats.
And that's where the Republicans have been doing that really well. I mean, we see Cobb County as an example when, the Republicans convened, in 2008 after Obama won and said to themselves, we're going to run this local races. We're not going to think about federal races as much. We're not going to invest as much unless it's a Graham or a McConnell race, right? We're going to do a lot of attention there, but they're very local and strategic. And I hear you on that. I definitely would agree that we have to get back to the infrastructure building at the state and local level. I think we do really pay most attention, you're right, to like federal races and what looks good for a flip, right? Versus a long-term investment strategy, for sure.
Well, there's one gangster move that resets all of that as far as the thinking. Primary Chuck Schumer. I think a lot of the decisions that were made as far as especially the funding of candidates and choice of candidates to support in the Senate race, had we had different leadership, it would have been a much different result.
Sorry about that. I was sending a quick text. Also a good point. So we have about 8 minutes. So I'm going to go back to the map, and I just want to finish up the review of I think where we are. And then while I'm pulling it up, if anyone has any other notes, whether it's local stuff, state stuff, U.S. Senate. Oh, I do want to raise this point when you talk about long-term infrastructure. Y'all talking about right now the presidency and legislative seats, Supreme Court, federal courts, state courts. Amy Coney Barrett was identified in law school on the conservative track. So that I'm not surprised that she is now the newest justice, because the conservative movement has been very good in the last 25, 30 years in identifying young jurists who they can eventually appoint to the bench. She was literally one of those candidates. She clerked for, I think, Scalia. I mean, she was in the pipeline. We don't even do that.
So they believe in investing in a farm team.
Yes.
And we haven't been doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's go back to the board. I feel like
so Nick, while you're pulling up the map, I think it's interesting how in Wisconsin we only won by 20,000 votes. I know it's not officially reflected there, but the Board of Election tweeted just about 30 minutes ago that they have a majority of votes counted at this point, and they believe it's going to go Biden. But it's again a razor thin margin, which begs the question: what are we going to do differently in this next 4 years to make sure that it does not have to be razor close in communities like Wisconsin, where we know there are plenty of organizers ready to work for you for the next 4 years to get the numbers up. Like Wisconsin is one of those things where there's so many nonprofits, PAC partners, local organizations that are led by people of color that want to do the turnout and registration needed to win if we will invest, right? So
that's a fantastic point. And 20,000 votes is, like you said, razor thin. And it turns out I think Biden will win the election, but by these very narrow margins. And here's a question which may take up actually a few minutes, and I want to hear from all of you. And then if it goes past 1:30, if about a few minutes, that's fine. So when you talk about what does the Democratic Party need to do next, in the primary, we saw a gap. We saw progressive candidates, and we saw the more center-right candidates, and some would call Joe Biden, particularly on the crime bill and all that stuff, a center-right candidate. Now, we also saw when it came to the voting process in the primary that particularly Southern Black voters tended to support Biden over Bernie. So there's a big gulf when it comes to ideology and race vis-a-vis ideology. So what are your thoughts on, like, what lane should the party be taking? Is it one lane? I don't think it is, but is it one lane? Is it the progressive lane? Is it the so-called moderate lane? We know the Overton window shifts based on, honestly, what Republicans do, but how do we set, what do we do? Like, what do we do? That's the question. Anyone can jump in on that.
If we switch our emphasis to engagement,
yeah,
all of that stuff will come out of that work, as opposed to trying to decide ahead of time, which direction we're going. Obviously, we're aimless as far, we are rudderless as far as that. And part of that is that we don't have enough ground information. We haven't been working with our people enough in meaningful ways that we know where we should be going, and we're building the relationships in our work to get us there. But one of the things before we go off, I just want to say,
sure,
Joe Biden is going to win based on Black vote.
Yeah.
All right. So we need to be prepared to invoice him the day that he is declared the winner. All right. We need to invoice him. We need to be able to tell him, be in position to tell him what we need immediately from him, the kind of commitments we need from him as far as what's going to happen with COVID, what's going to happen with the economy,
healthcare,
what's going to happen with Build Back Better, what's going to happen with healthcare pervasively. Yeah. We need specific commitments that we present to him, and that he responds to and he checks off on.
I would add to that list. Yes, I would agree 100%. I would add to the list wealth building. When it comes to particularly Black and brown Americans, the first thing that both parties usually start talking about first is what? Prison, jail.
Yeah.
The vast majority of us are not in prison. We're not in jail. The vast majority of us are wage earners trying to earn more and build a life that we want to live, and battling against systemic racism, lack of mortgages and loans, lack of credit, all that stuff. So
and that's
I don't want to just hear about
that's our problem. You know why? Because we don't take ownership of the party from that standpoint. We got this election. We own the effing party. We own it. You don't get anywhere without Black women. You don't get anywhere without Black folks.
Correct.
Right? We own it. We want this, not this asking for it.
Right.
Present the invoice the day he's declared. Start presenting the invoice.
Absolutely. And this is going to be a little controversial, but I'm from California originally. I watched Senator Harris's rise from DA to Attorney General to what I think she will be Vice President-elect in the next 24 hours. She also has to be held accountable. All of them do. We can't just assume that because we have a certain similarity in gender or race or any other demographic identifier that they are going to speak clearly enough and aggressively enough to our isures. I'm a big fan of President Obama. I don't think he went far enough. Now, there's reasons why. There's a Congress that we lost in the first 3 years of his administration. But I don't think he went far enough on racial justice. And unfortunately, when I heard him speak to particularly Black men, I'm just going to be honest. I personally often heard condescension. Pull up your pants, take care of your family. Sure.
Initially.
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
It's a different conversation now.
Right.
But that's where he is now is where he should have been years ago.
Agreed.
But why is that? And the same thing I went over last night. We weren't out in the street when we should have been out in the street. We did this pause. We gave him a pass because we didn't want to hurt him. And we hurt him by him not being able to point to the people out in the street saying they are correct. We need to make an adjustment because they are right. They are morally right. We need to make an adjustment.
Yeah.
Powered by that. We weren't there.
Absolutely.
Can't afford that anymore. Nobody gets a pass.
Yeah. Let's get out of here, right?
Yeah.
So before we jump off, I want to open the floor to any other final comments. And then what I really want to do, I keep saying it, I'm going to go back for the last time in this hour to the map to see and get an update on where we are. And then if folks are cool with it, we'll come back either later today or some point tomorrow to update folks on where we are. I think folks want to hear, like, this stuff is fine, but I think they want to hear like this organic conversation and what we're really seeing. So I value this space, and I'm glad you all jumped in. Let me pause and open the floor to any other comments. And while I'll do that, I'm going to pull the map back up.
Yeah, I just heard Michigan is coming in strong for Biden. Again, another razor thin margin, you guys, but that's really helpful. We can get one more state. Michigan and Wisconsin are, again, these new battleground states I've been talking about. These are going to help us get over the edge. I thought this count would drag until Friday. I'll be honest, Nick, you're very optimistic in saying 24 hours, but it sounds like maybe we will get here to the end before Friday. So just wanted to share that update with everyone. It's very exciting result to hear. We need to count every vote, obviously, but preliminary results are saying with majority of ballots count.
It's got 99% in
Michigan.
Yeah, 99% in. He's doing at least a point over.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, they're not going to do that yet until they hear from Board of Elections, but they're counting enough. So I've got optimism.
Honestly, Nekpen and Chet, you just made my day. Thank you, because I was like, what is happening in Michigan?
Also, apparently there's 240,000 votes in that are being counted right now in Georgia, almost exclusively from the Atlanta and the metropolitan area.
That's correct. And look at this, Georgia, 93% reporting. Biden is down. What is that? 86,000 votes. That's 2%.
Yeah,
that's 2%.
Yeah.
So Nyla was getting at this. I think. Well, let me not speak. You know better than me. What are your thoughts about that, Nyla? About Georgia?
I think that this is just the reflection of the organizing that has been taking place over the last 10 years. And also, I think just how, and this is, again, not the work of the party, this is the work of electoral campaigns on the ground, specifically spearheaded by Stacey Abrams, who planted those seeds back in 2010 and continued the work even after she lost. Again, the impact of organizing is clear, right? You do not just stick around the election cycle, because really for our communities and really for sustainability for electoral wins as a party, election cycles are 365 days a year, right? Yeah. They do not come in November every 4 years or every 2 years. So I think that's what Georgia's reflecting to me. And I think just to close out my comments is I think for me, like this cycle and future cycles, to me, I think that I hope as a party, we begin to think about and really analyze what this idea of representative democracy means for us. Going back to Kamala Harris, Senator Kamala Harris, being VP, representative democracy. What does it mean for us, and how that can show up differently depending on our identities and our backgrounds and our ideologies. But also the need for government accountability. And the last thing I will mention is that there is definitely a conversation and actions to be had as it relates to the quote unquote moderate versus progressive divide. Yeah. I think it's important that we acknowledge the racial dynamic of those conversations. For those of you who may not know, I do not identify as a progressive, nor do I identify as an establishment hack, as some would probably argue. Just keeping it 100 with y'all. I've been advocating for progressive policies without the title, my entire career. But because I've been in politics for 20 years, I'm considered establishment, right? And so how there are gendered and racial lenses to how we talk about who was establishment and who was progressive. And as someone, again, who has, worked in Democratic politics in two of the battleground states this year, Georgia and Texas, it looks different in Texas and Georgia when we talk about progressive policies than if we're talking about in the city. How you go upstate, progressive, the concept of progressivism looks a lot different, right? And I don't think it's necessarily bad or good. I think it's a reality that we need to acknowledge as a party and come to terms with how do we, out of all this chaos and conflict of the narrative of progressive versus moderate, how do we pull out policy solutions that fix the problems that as Democrats, we are all trying to find resolution to under the umbrella of the Democratic Party?
Oh. I think that was the benediction. That's fantastic, Nyla.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to just jump in, and then we'll sign off from
Yeah,
here.
I just have two things that I think some of these, numbers are calling out for me.
Yeah.
One, I definitely am excited and optimistic by the turnout in this election cycle. I think that at the start of the year, I was really anxious about how we would be able to have a free and fair election and get people to vote in a way that felt safe for them. Given the voter intimidation and suppression and mixed messaging from the president at the top, I was really concerned that would impact voters' participation and engagement at the polls, and that was not the case. So that's something that I think is worth acknowledging in this very interesting year.
Yeah.
I do think there's two learnings for the party here, which, I like to say the DNC will change, but we always seem to go back to our old habits, unfortunately.
Right.
One, like Nyla said, we have to do more accountability, and that only comes from local leadership. And I'm really excited to have a conversation about a post-2016 world where we had 8 people running for the same seat. Half of them are now supporting Biden, but the other half are sort of somewhere else doing other things. This idea that people want policies that are common sense, but then others in our party are saying we have to have a certain ideology. It's a very interesting conversation because I think most people are centrists, right? I have a podcast coming out. I'm going to plug my podcast now. It's called There's Room in the Middle. It's been picked up by the Colorcast Network because I'm really scared about this dichotomy of conversation we keep having about holding people accountable to one political bloc, but not thinking about what's best for most Americans. We didn't win with the attempt to unify the country this cycle. We did not get that message across very well. People did not buy it, that they wanted a unified America. We saw that in the numbers and the results, unfortunately, but we still need to think about what works for most Americans. And I think that as a Black person, I'm never going to support policy that does not support communities of color and minorities. That's not right. However, I do know there's need to make concessions in our party in areas that most voters care about. People are struggling. I mean, I'm not talking about earners who are people of color only. White people are struggling in this country. They're struggling from an economic perspective and also from a social perspective. They don't feel like they can do anything about the economics, so they're going with the social argument. I'm going to keep my power because of my whiteness and because of the community I come from. That is where I'm leaning, because they don't feel like anyone's speaking to their economics. How can Democrats win this economics conversation? That's where my head is going, right? Because at the end of the day, if we're not doing that better than Trump, then we lose. And we did see that here. We're not doing that for those majority white voters who feel like this country is no longer helping them. The jobs are leaving because of globalization. They don't think it's because of businessmen like Donald Trump, unfortunately, but they think it's government that's failing them. Government that's not advocating for them on trade, on corporate finance, on corporate responsibility and accountability that used to be important to American voters. So they need to have a party that understands that and can speak to it. And in that conversation about economics and equity, we can still organize local communities and value them. So this idea that we need to shift our paradigm has been loud and clear. We didn't get it in 2016. We were all in shock. And now in 2020, we're like, oh, you're really serious. Like, y'all are really serious that you need to be heard, or you're going to try to fight people off the road for a vote.
Literally.
So that's what I'm learning. And I'm hoping to have that conversation after all the dust settles for this particular race.
Well, let's come back and have that conversation, because that's like an hour-long panel in of itself. And to your point, I think race and gender and the isms are proxy for that conversation that you're talking about that needs to be had.
Yes. Totally. Because that's easily identifiable, right?
Exactly.
I may not really be able to break open your tax policy, understand what you're talking about or how it impacts my family, but I understand what you say. You get me. Yeah. And you get me. You're speaking like me. You're coming to my community. You're going to give me free stuff. You're going to tell me about how like socialism is taking my life, because that's been my experience for the last decade, right? For some people, that's what they feel. Like being able to speak to that, we still don't have that very
absolutely
well
correct.
done. I think
absolutely correct.
We missed it with Hillary completely, but like this cycle we didn't get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all. We can literally go on until 5 o'clock, and we will come back at some point. I'll talk to the co-hosts about when they want to come back again. If any of you want to just jump back on, just an open conversation. This has been great. It's been a really fantastic hour, actually 70 minutes, and we'll do this again. But if anyone doesn't have any thing to add, we will sign off. Any closing things, and if not, we'll sign off for now. Okay.
All I
Great,
will
thanks.
say,
Yeah.
all I'll just say is I said that if we win Georgia, we got it in the
You did.
bag.
Did Jacob? I saw that.
Did.
And I've been saying that now. Man, that looks really close. They have a lot of mail-ins that they're anticipating there. Do we know?
Yeah, it's in central the Atlanta region, Cobb County, all the way down to what's the other county in the south that they're counting. They have a lot of they had to start counting yesterday, so they couldn't touch anything, and that's why it's going to take a while with
Nyla said Fulton County.
Fulton. Thank you. I was like, what is that stuff?
Yeah, no problem. Great. All right, this has been fantastic. We will do it again. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back if there's an announcement. We'll see. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks all.
Great.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.